Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Colin. I want to welcome you back to the Nicaea 3 YouTube channel. Today we're going to be looking at specifically St. Paul's encounter with the Greeks, with some of the Greek philosophers of his day on the Areopagus in Athens. And I want to look at some of the ancient Greek philosophical concepts that he was dealing with and how he contrasts those with the Judeo-Christian philosophical framework for God. And then I want to also compare that to the modern day and some of the various philosophies that we see taking place in our world today. Okay. Now, before we get started, if you feel so moved, keep in mind that a like and especially a subscription to this YouTube channel can really help us grow. So I just want to give a plug for that before we begin. Okay. So in this extraordinary story, when St. Paul encounters the philosophers of his day on the Areopagus in Athens, we see some pretty extraordinary things take place. Okay. Now, there are just a couple things to note to begin with this exploration into this particular story in the Acts of the Apostles. Keep in mind that it was almost like a sport for the ancient Greeks to debate various philosophical concepts, okay? And so when they're doing this, they're not doing this as sort of an abstract just thing from their lives that they don't really care about. To them, this is very important, and this is really kind of a sport or almost a game for them, trying to wrestle through these various schools of philosophy, okay? Now, the two main schools of ancient Greek philosophy that St. Paul encounters on the Areopagus, one are the Stoics, and the others are the Epicureans, okay? Now, the Stoics, you can kind of relate to modern day pantheism. It's kind of this notion of like that all matter is God, okay, in their concept, okay? And then the Epicureans would have said that God and the world are distinct from one another, so they're not pantheists. But the Epicureans would have said, kind of like a modern day deist, that God is far off away from this universe and he doesn't really interact with it very much, okay? And those are two of the major philosophical schools in the ancient Greek world, okay? Now, St. Paul, being the great missionary that he was and really setting the stage for how we today in the church should do missionary work in these, as we encounter foreign just worldviews and ideologies, is he's walking up to the Areopagus and he passes a marker that's dedicated to the unknown God, okay? And in a sense, you could relate this God whom he's going to, this monument to this unknown God that he's going to reference, you could think of it as a monument to the God of the philosophers, okay? It's a monotheistic concept of God, but it's kind of the God that you could reason to via philosophy, okay? And listen to what St. Paul does. He goes up and he says, you know this marker to the unknown God that you have? That God is actually the triune God, basically. He says, this is Yahweh. This is the God of the Hebrews. This is I am who I am, okay? And he uses philosophy, which will later be picked up in the works of St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Theologica. He uses these philosophical concepts to reason for God from the ancient Greek methods, okay? And then kind of translating those into Christendom, okay? So this is what St. Paul does directly in the scriptures. He says, you know that marker to an unknown God, this is actually the God of the Hebrews who became incarnate as Jesus, okay? And so what the Judeo-Christian philosophical concept of God does, in contrast to the Stoics and the Epicureans, is it gives a concept of God who is distinct from the world, okay? So in a sense, it reflects a bit of what the Epicureans are talking about there, that God and the world are not the same, okay? Not pantheism. However, it differs from Epicureanism in saying that this God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, directly interacts with and cares for the cosmos he created. So he's an entity that is distinct from space-time and the space-time universe. However, he also directly interacts with and cares about this particular space-time reality, okay? And so St. Paul then is arguing from that philosophical framework and is saying this view outflanks and far outpaces in its coherence and in its beauty, in all the transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty. It transcends these other philosophies of the ancient world, okay? And from there, he argues for then the incarnation of that God in the person of Jesus, okay? So essentially for the triune God, okay? Now, how might this have something to speak into our world today? Well, certainly we know that at the Enlightenment, there was a large problem with deism, okay? Kind of this notion of that God had created this world kind of like a clockmaker and then distanced himself from it. And obviously that leaves all sorts of problems. It kind of leaves us as the masters of our own fate within this universe. That has big problems. So the Christian concept in the modern world has something to speak against deism in that sense. And then it also has something to speak against pantheism, which kind of just flattens out creation and God. Again, not really giving the highest concept of who God could be, which is a God who is love and out of his own love within his own nature pours out and creates the cosmos, is distinct from them, but intricately cares for the cosmos, okay? This is probably for a different video, but I would also argue scientifically, this is much more coherent with any discipline of science, that that God is distinct from the universe. You can think of it that science is thinking the thoughts of God after he already thought them. I believe that quote sometimes is attributed to Einstein. I don't know if that's really authentic, but you can think of it that way. Science is, I'll say it again, science is thinking the thoughts of God after he already thought them. Now, that type of framework only makes sense within a creation where God, the one who is, simply is, stands outside of space and time and creates space and time. And in Christian notion, this is from the love of God himself, overflowing from himself to create the cosmos. But he's distinct from them, yet he still also interacts with them and deeply cares, okay? So in this sense, it has something for the modern world to speak against pantheism, to show the distinctness of God in creation, because in doing so, it also keeps us from being kind of the masters of our own fate, and Epicureanism, which I already noted, it speaks against that same thing as well. So this is how we can take an ancient argument that St. Paul was making, apply it to our modern circumstance, and recognize that as Christians, we still have this profoundly coherent, beautiful, and relevant philosophical framework and concept that can speak against various errors that we see in our world today. We are a people who are bound up, are caught up, and are bound to the natural law and to the moral law. Okay, so it's something that's beyond ourselves. And this is partially why creator and creation being distinct is so important, because we do exist under parameters that have already been set. The bowling alleys have already been set, and this is the Garden of Eden, right? God is telling them what's good and evil. They don't get to be the masters of that decision, okay? So the alley lanes are set. However, with that said, the one who then creates and overflows into that also can then speak into our situation and deeply cares about it and walks with us as we navigate the complexities of this life and the complexities of the Christian faith, okay? So obviously that doesn't resolve every question you've ever probably had, but what it does do is it talks about the philosophical framework and ideology of Christianity and how our philosophical framework, certainly we would argue, outflanks and just beautifully answers all the other philosophies of the day. And St. Paul's specific experience on the, and of our day as well, and St. Paul's specific experience on the Areopagus also speaks to how we can go into foreign ideological lands, whether that's another religion or even irreligion, and we can speak into those situations and try to bring people to the fullness and beauty of what our philosophical framework as Christians can offer the world. So that's what I have for us today. I pray you're blessed in it, and I pray it stirs up some genuinely interesting thoughts within your mind. So again, if you feel so moved, if you hit the like and subscribe button, that can help share this channel, and we'll see you in the next video, guys. God's peace.